My name is Andrea. I will be your moderator this evening. I'm with Juris Education. I'm here alongside Mika and Tamar, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. So tonight's topic is everything non-traditional law school applicants need to know. We're really excited about this one. I think we have a ton of really awesome nuggets to drop and a ton of really valuable information. But before we do that, I just have a couple of housekeeping rules. So first and foremost, this webinar is recorded. We get that question every webinar. So if you do need to step away, do not worry. You will receive a recording in your inbox within a day or two. If by chance you don't receive it, please check your spam. It'll be there. In terms of how long we're looking at running tonight's discussion, the goal is an hour. So we'll spend the majority of the discussion tonight's hour speaking about law school admissions timelines, building a strong application narrative, securing strong letters of recommendation, writing a compelling personal statement. But we also would love to leave some room towards the end for a Q&A, which is really your moment to shine, to get up close and personal with Mika and Tamar and really get those questions answered. Before I pass it off to them, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce who we are, because I recognize that there's a ton of new faces in this webinar. Whether you've been with us before or this is your first time, we're really excited to have you here. As mentioned, we're Juris Education. We're a globally recognized law school admissions consulting firm offering comprehensive support from test prep to law school admissions and even bar exam tutoring. With a 94% acceptance rate, our students get into the top law schools in the United States. Last cycle alone, our T14 acceptance was 34%, which is almost 6 times higher than the national average of 5.7%. So this is something we're extremely proud of. We really believe in starting the law school application process as early as possible, which is why we offer something called pre-law advising and profile development. Essentially what this is it focuses on building each student's professional cover letter and resume to highlight their most meaningful experiences. We also assist candidates in boosting their academic transcripts and GPA, finding stellar internships, creating a timeline for LSAT prep. And all of this is done with one goal in mind, and that's to get applicants into their dream law program, whatever that may be. Our private LSAT tutors also assess each student's strengths and weaknesses. This helps then create a custom study plan structure for the days, weeks, and months ahead. We tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedules, providing the right assessments and lessons as they become familiar with the test, content, strategies, and of course, format. On average, we do see a 12-point increase for 45 plus hours of tutoring, and we do offer a 165 plus LSAT score guarantee with our 60-hour program. So once we've done all of this and we've really helped shape an outstanding candidate, we support in creating the perfect application. So this really looks like the creation of a well-balanced list of target, safety, and reach schools. We also help build resumes and obtain letters of recommendations from the right recommenders. Our admissions counselors, who are also essay writing experts, will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they're perfect. I know Tamar and Mika both have a lot to share about this, so I'll let them go into that in a little bit. At the end of the day, our goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to build the perfect candidate and application. We utilize every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create really stand out from the rest and really put our students in a position to get into their dream schools. We're excited to be a part of this. We're excited to assist you, and we look forward to all your consultations because we do offer one-on-one consultations as well. With that being said, Tamar, Mika, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here. My name is Tamar Alexanian. I use she, her pronouns. I am an admissions counselor with Juris. I've been with Juris for a few years now. Now I am a law school professor at American University, Washington College of Law. I work in the clinic, in one of our clinics, in civil litigation. My background is generally in child welfare, at the intersection of child welfare and LGBTQ rights. I went to the University of Michigan for law school, and then before that went to Vanderbilt for undergrad and was an English and gender studies double major. So it's great to be here. I'm so excited to talk about all of the things that I feel like I wish I had known before I went to law school and when I was applying, and it's good to see so many of you here.
So, hi, I'm Mika. I am a full-time LSAT tutor and admissions counselor. I've been with Juris for, a couple of years now. I took the LSAT twice in 2011. I got a 172 and then a 179. I attended the University of Chicago Law School from 2012 to 2015. I clerked with a bankruptcy judge in Delaware and then worked as a corporate restructuring litigator for about 5.5 years before coming back to teaching during the pandemic. Really excited to do this one. I think we did this one together about 3 months ago or so. Yeah, so really excited to give this presentation again and just sort of talk about what it's like being non-traditional and how to make it through. So I'll turn it back over to Tamar to start.
Awesome. So we're going to start talking about non-traditional timelines because I think my experience is that those timelines are very different. And also sometimes people can get really in their heads about, well, why am I not following the traditional timeline? Why am I, like putting additional kind of pressure on themselves to be doing what maybe more traditional students are doing in terms of studying and how long they're spending on things or how much time they're devoting to things. And I think it's really important to understand that it's okay to have a different plan. And for non-traditional students in particular, that is very, very normal and honestly, sometimes better. So keys for success. You want to be effective at time management. This is true forever and ever, even after you apply to law school, right? Like that will serve you well in law school. It will serve you well out of law school. But it can be particularly important at this stage for non-traditional students because sometimes, as many of you all probably know even better than I do, you might have really significant and unavoidable time commitments on your plate, right? Like you might have a family, you might have multiple kids, you might have caregiving duties, you might have a full-time job, you might have more than a full-time job, right? Like there are so many additional factors, and those are not things that you can necessarily like schedule off your plate or, like make it fit perfectly in a 2-hour window. Those are things that kind of take priority. And so that means that you need to slot your law school application timeline into that priority. You want to find ways to balance whatever you're doing. And you might be doing multiple of those things that I listed, right? Work, family, other commitments. We'll talk about this kind of throughout the evening, but that might elongate your timeline, right? Because you might have fewer hours every day to devote to it, whatever it is at that time. You still want to stay on top of key deadlines, though. This is something that I think students, all students, whether you're a traditional law school student or a non-traditional law school student, there's lots of moving deadlines in this game. I feel like no one has the same application deadline. No one has the same scholarship deadline. No one has this, like all of them are kind of all over the place. And this year, for example, a bunch of if you were applying to LA schools, a lot of the LA schools were affected by the fires, right? And so a lot of those application deadlines moved by a month. They gave applicants an additional month to apply this year, which I haven't seen happen before. So lots of kind of things to be very aware of and make sure that you know where different pieces are moving, because you will not want to be late on any of those pieces. Law schools will not look kindly on that. And if you plan ahead, you can really craft a super strong application. None of you should walk away thinking I'm at a disadvantage because I'm a non-traditional student, or I have less time and therefore the quality of my materials will not be as good. I don't think either of those things are true. I think non-traditional applicants, in some ways have a leg up, in some ways can be really, really successful at law school and in the law school application cycles. You just have to kind of plan for what that difference might look like in your life as you're planning. Back to you.
So let's just think about the reasonable timeline when you're a non-traditional student, let's say working a full-time job, right? The LSAT is equally, if not slightly more important than your GPA in terms of getting admitted to law school. And those are two biggest factors in terms of what law schools you get into. So there's a timeline for taking the LSAT, and you really need to respect the size of that timeline. figure out what your goal schools are, right? Where would you like to go? Do a little bit of research on what sort of stats they generally require, right? You can find information about median GPA, median LSAT, and percentiles on every accredited law school in the country. And then compare your own to what you need, right? And then think about how long that's going to take to get there. For most people, I recommend at least like 150 hours of studying and practice before you take the real thing. And I don't think people really max out for at least another 100+ hours of studying. So really build a lot of time in. Think about when you want to apply, right? Obviously, it is best to submit an application as soon as the application season opens. Law school uses rolling admissions, which means that there's not just one application date, but the earlier you apply, the more likely it is you get in, / the less intense the stats requirements become. So think about it that way. You need to get your LSAT score back before you apply. Or it needs to be on its way back when you submit your application, right? If you want to be certain of being in that first wave of consideration, which means this is about October, November when this happens. So preferably you have your LSAT score, you take the LSAT in August or September. Except it's very common for people to need to retake. Like I said, I took the test twice. I got a 172 and then a 179. There's a lot of improvement to be made even when you made it to the 170s, right? It still took me, I studied for another 3 months to get from that 172 to that 179. So think about your goal score. Think about the schools you want to get into and the scores you need to get into there. Build a timeline so that you can apply as soon as the application season opens, right? And build in time to retake the LSAT if needed. So I tell people, I always think June/August, June/October, July, October, July. That kind of matchup works really well. Give yourself 2 months. You can take it in back-to-back months, but I really don't advise it. So that is what you should be planning. If you want to be applying this upcoming year, you should really be thinking about this right now, right? So it's good that you're on this call. So about 6 to 9 months before the application season opens, it's time to research what a law school application looks like, right? So jump on to lsac.org, lsac.org. That's the Law School Admissions Council. They're the ones who administer the LSAT. And they are the centralized hub for all of your applications. So read up on their materials, right? They'll have some basic overviews of all of this stuff. Do a little bit of Googling. And then start brainstorming about what your application package is going to look like. For a lot of schools, especially like the T14, the top 14 in the nation schools, you're probably going to have to write multiple extra essays as well. So think about the story you are selling about yourself and think about how you might want to write a personal statement that tells them who you are and why you're going to be in law, why you want to be in law school. This is also a really good time to sign up for the Credential Assembly Service through LSAC, LSAC. This is where all of your applications go through. And it's a good time to start thinking of and reaching out to people who might write letters of recommendation for you. As Tamara and I both know, every year we have students who get professors that say they'll write a letter, and 2.5 months later, there's still no letter, right? So doing this as early as possible, thinking about who you'd like to get at them from and getting them to start setting that up is a really good idea to prevent, big frustration down the road where you're just waiting on this one person to finally send this thing. So get all of that stuff set up. Basically, go to the Law School Admission Council's website and read. right? That should be probably the first thing you do next if you want to go to law school, right? Read what the process is and how it works. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect. So once you get to the 3 to 6 months before applying spot, you want to make sure that you at that point have taken at least an LSAT, right? I will say in the past maybe 3 cycles have not had anyone take the LSAT only once. I think retesting is increasingly common. I think that retesting, if you have the time for it, can generally be a good thing. I generally do not encourage people to wait until the last minute to do the test where it is butting up against the rest of your application, or it would be the only thing holding your application up, or you're banking on getting your dream score and then you don't, and then you don't have a ton of time to figure out what to do next because you're kind of in a mad dash. And that, I think, is especially true for non-traditional applicants because you might have even less flexibility on testing dates or even less flexibility on how much additional time you can dedicate to the LSAT if you haven't really planned ahead. So you all more than most, if you're a non-traditional applicant, I would make sure that you really think about when can I do this early to almost with the knowledge that you likely will want to take it a second time. And if you don't, great. What a lovely surprise that you don't have to take it a second time. You got your dream score. And then you can submit that score and you get some more time back in your life. And then if not, then you don't have to kind of scramble on the back end. At that point, you also want to be drafting and maybe finalizing your personal statement. And some folks do tailor their maybe conclusion paragraph, maybe the individual personal statement to the school, depending on kind of the school's qualities and characteristics. I'm actually starting to see more and more personal statements that have kind of a really specific twist that law schools are asking for. So that might be something where you really need to be writing kind of multiple versions of a personal statement. So I would keep that in mind and at least start at this point having a really nice solid draft of kind of the body of what you want the personal statement to be, that is flexible enough for you to change it if you want to, right? And then, like we said, secure and confirm letters of rec. I generally recommend telling them that they are due earlier than they are actually due. I do not recommend telling them that they have until April or May, right? Because that could be the only thing holding your application up. If you are trying to get your applications in by, let's say, November 15th, I would tell them the rec letters are due November 1. That gives you 2 weeks to chase them down, assuming that you are staying on your timeline. And I don't generally, maybe I don't say the word due. I say like, I need, the recommendation letter needs to go in by that date because that's when I'm planning on applying. So you don't have to lie, right? Because your professors or recommenders could figure out that they're not due, but because it's rolling admissions, it really does matter that they get them in. And yeah, I have seen a number of, and now that I'm a professor, I feel like I can say this freely. Professors are the worst about this. They don't do anything until it's like really close to the deadline because they just have a million other things to do. And so you do not want to give them, you want to be respectful. Don't ask a week in advance, right? Like that's also not okay. But if you are going to give them a ton of time ahead of time, they're not spending an hour every week working on it. They're just not. And so make sure that you are giving yourself enough cushion and really, really early to finalize those letters. Make sure they're people you trust. Make sure you have maybe a backup that you've thought of in case something falls through or in case some recommender has like a family emergency or, something where they said yes, but they no longer can. Those are all things kind of in the 3 to 6 month realm. And then the 1 to 3 months before applications, that's when you want to be doing research on kind of the campus culture, the student body culture, the kind of faculty research, if the school has, like some schools have concentrations, right? If you're interested in a particular concentration. Submit applications as early as possible. This really is one of my least favorite parts of the law school application game. It's rolling, and so you have a much better shot at getting in earlier rather than later, even with the same exact application, because there are just more spots for you. So you want to get things in as early as you can, and sometimes that means that students they thought they were going to get everything ready for this cycle. A bunch of things fell through, right? Like they couldn't figure out their personal statement. A bunch of their recommenders didn't work out. They didn't get the LSAT score they wanted. If those things kind of start happening, that is a moment when I often tell students, this might be a good time to think about waiting until next year. Trying to apply by the last day applications are open is not, yes, your application will get in, but I don't know that you will get in because there's just not a ton of spots left. So I would try and be really, really mindful of the rolling admissions piece as you're getting ready. And then follow up with schools to make sure that your materials have been received. I think LSAC makes this quite easy to see where things are and especially with like the CAS report, like how long it takes to generate and all of that good stuff. But it's a good thing to follow up with thank you notes if you've met anyone specifically, or, some schools have interviews. You want to make sure that you follow up with those with thank you emails and all that good stuff.
All right. So I think we're talking now about my subject matter expertise, the LSAT. The LSAT is probably the most critical component of your app. That's basically accurate. The way law school rankings works dictates a lot about how law schools think about admissions, and unfortunately, that prioritizes LSAT and GPA more than anything else. And high LSAT scores are rarer than high GPAs, and so the LSAT ends up being probably the number one component of your application. It is not easy to get a high LSAT score. It genuinely is not easy to get a high LSAT score. I don't know anybody who is a quote unquote natural that just like kind of rolled up and did the test and got a 170 plus without really trying. That's not a thing the way it is for maybe the SAT or the ACT. The LSAT involves a lot of specific skill acquisition, right? It's not just testing your general ability to comprehend what you're reading. It is testing that, but it's also testing your ability to understand and interpret author intent and to make inferences about what an author might think or what about someone in an argument might think. It involves critical analysis of logical reasoning, right? Written arguments in the English language. And all of these skills take time and effort, right? Genuine practice to master. So the LSAT involves a lot of work to get there, but I can testify for myself and with my students that it is perfectly possible to get there. I have a former student who's now at UPenn who went from a 137 to a 177. Right? It took him about a year. He was a master's student actually, he was a pretty non-traditional applicant. He was finishing his master's. He was a concert pianist, right? So it took him a while and a lot of work, but he did get that score and he got into UPenn. He got into a lot of the T14, but UPenn was where his girlfriend, et cetera, et cetera. So the LSAT is controllable, right? If you are out of school, there's no changing the GPA that you had in school, right? They literally, that is the rule. It's the GPA, the LSAT, that LSAC considers is the GPA earned for the courses that were necessary to earn your first bachelor's degree. There is no way you could change the way they calculate GPA, right? This is set in stone. The LSAT definitely isn't, right? And so because this is the most controllable factor under your control, it's the one that you should really, really dedicate a lot of time and attention to. Good instruction also goes a long way. So I'll obviously make a little bit of a soft pitch here, which is we have great tutors, tutors that can provide lesson plans, a lot of guidance on resources, and obviously teach you all along the way. But there are tons of resources out there for self-study as well. Reddit, as always, is a great place to start. But really do dedicate a lot of time. If you're serious about law school, you got to get really serious about this test. All right. Back to you.
So strategic LSAT preparation. This is going to go very much in line with all of the things that we've talked about, but early on, you're going to want to develop a good study plan and a realistic study plan, right? You want to take in lots of factors. You want to think about what commitments you have that can't be moved. You want to think about what commitments you have that can be moved. You want to think about what hours of the day you're most productive, right? Like I am a night person. Studying at night was a good idea for me. If your best hours are in the morning, maybe you have morning time, right? Like maybe you're waking up before work and studying before work because that's when you're able to retain information best. So you want to think about those things. You want to think about how many hours you can study and sit still before you feel totally burnt out and it feels like hitting your head against a wall, right? Like it's not just studying harder, it's studying smarter. You can't just say, oh, Juris said that I need to do 150 hours. Like I'll just sit in a library for 150 hours and then I'll magically be ready. Those have to be really thoughtfully used hours, right? You have to make sure that you're retaining the information. You want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. You're reviewing the things you got wrong. Like all of those things matter a lot. And you want to make sure that you're also balancing, like, you don't want to burn out, right? Like this is a long game. Studying can be a long game. Applying for law school can be a long game. Law school is a long game, right? And especially if you're a non-traditional student and you might have an even longer timeline because you aren't studying full time, you want to make sure that you're doing things that won't result in you burning out. Focus on skill acquisition, right? You want to start maybe with untimed practice tests, but once you kind of keep going, you do need to make sure that you're doing some timed things, right? If we all had an infinite amount of time on the LSAT, I'm sure all of our scores would look very different, but we don't have an unlimited amount of time for a reason. And so you do eventually want to be hitting timed tests under time conditions. And reviewing the answers, right? Reviewing what things you're getting wrong, what patterns you have going on, all of those good things. And focus on high impact sections. You want to really focus on mastering the logical reasoning section, which can be 2 to 3 scored sections on the exam, right? So make sure that I remember when I was studying for the LSAT being like, at the time there were logic games and I loved logic games. And I was like, I'll just study a bunch for logic games, which was a silly thing because I didn't need to study that much for logic games, right? Like it was just kind of the low hanging fruit for me. So you need to identify what your weaknesses are and make sure you're finding ways to study those and not making sure you're getting some serious bang for your buck for the amount of time that you're spending on things.
All right. So advanced strategies. I don't know, I would say advanced, but really just more strategy. Number one is this is a lot of different discrete skills. And there are over 20 question types in the logical reasoning section and easily another 20 or so in the reading comp section. And different questions are asking very fundamentally different things and involve different skill sets. So you need to train yourself from like a skill-based level and then also from a question type-based level. As you do that, you need to be taking full-sized practice sections or full-sized practice tests to sort of track your progress overall. And finally, as you do that, you should be thinking about how you're doing, thinking about what your strengths and weaknesses are, thinking about what stuff hasn't been improving despite your best efforts so far, thinking about how you can change up your study methods, right? How you can refine what you're doing. The LSAT isn't, right, a memorization test, right? It's not something where we can just sit down and put time into it and come out with the info. It needs to be more interactive in terms of like how you're interacting with the exam. This is extremely time pressured test, which also makes it kind of emotionally pressured too, right? There's a lot of intensity here. So pursuing strategies like focusing on the questions you feel good with and not digging in for 4 minutes on things that you're struggling with, right? Which not only helps you maximize like good time usage, but also keeps you from getting sort of stuck mentally and emotionally on a question and not being able to move past it, right? It's a numbers game. Blind review is a study process that's very highly thought of, involving you doing the same test or practice section twice, once timed and once untimed, to try and sort of suss out which questions are you missing because of the time pressure versus which questions are you missing solely because of a skill, like something you just need to learn more about, right? And so using this process, even though it is very time consuming, using it on a regular basis every few weeks can really be helpful in terms of figuring out what you're doing wrong, right? Which is much harder to define with a test like this than people think, because as I said, there's dozens of question types, 2 different sections, there's lots of skills involved, there's lots of ways to be wrong. And so any method that helps us pin down what's going wrong is valuable. Finally, right, there's lots of test prep websites out there, usually subscribers and stuff. You subscribe and everything, but they can help you track your analytics and help you assess what you're doing well and not doing well. I think that's a really good idea, right? Like I said, this test is wildly important. Investing in resources is a wise investment here. I always give the point that, like, you know, attending, say, Columbia in New York City is going to cost you like $250,000 in loans, unless you're bringing in a lot of your own money. But if you got into Columbia and then magically had a LSAT score that was 5 points higher, well, now you may have just gotten a 1 or even 2 year scholarship that's going to save you $100,000+ So investing upfront in good resources, putting the time in to research your resources, right, should really be high on your list, because I graduated with $200,000 in debt and I did not love that. I can guarantee you. So yeah, invest in LSAT prep.
Okay. Maximizing LSAT potential. I know we've talked a lot about the LSAT tonight. Hopefully the big takeaway is to not snooze on this. I think it's really easy to think that, you know, like you have a really good GPA or you have, you know, like you're a really good writer. The LSAT is not just like one piece of your application. It's a big piece of your application. So make sure that you're taking the preparation for it really seriously. Optimize for your test day performance, right? So at that point, hopefully you really developed kind of like an internal clock for what your pacing is and when you need to be moving from question to question. Practice mindfulness techniques to manage stress, whatever that looks like for you. I am someone who hates eating on test days, but also if I don't, I test terribly. So I have to like force food down before I go to a test, right? Figure out what your things are. Figure out what kind of the best breakfast is going to be for you. And especially if you have a nervous stomach or an anxious stomach or whatever, get a good night's sleep, whatever sleep habits you need, whatever good luck charms you need, like all of those things are things that you should, you know, the night before is not the time to cram. The LSAT is not really a crammable test. And then leveraging practice tests effectively. You want to be simulating test day conditions as much as you can, especially, you know, maybe not right away when you start practicing, but as time goes on, you want to make sure that you're testing around the time that you would be testing in an environment similar to how you would be testing, only with materials that you can have inside the test room, right? Like, don't go to the fridge in the middle of the test and like grab your favorite drink, or, you know, like make sure that you are prepping as if you are taking the test, so that the things that are surprises are the questions and not the specific test day conditions. And like we've been saying, you want to make sure that you're focusing on post-test analysis to make sure that at that point you've identified what patterns you have, and what errors you tend to make.
Well, I think this one's out of order, actually. I think we're supposed to do this one after the break.
Oh, no. Okay, let me switch.
Hello, so sorry about that. It took me a second to mute myself. Yes, that one was out of order, so sorry about that, everyone. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. I think because I want to be mindful of time and the fact that we have quite a bit remaining in the presentation. Couple of questions in here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling up. Okay, so this wasn't necessarily something we touched on, but we had this question come up quite a few times within the course of this webinar thus far. People are asking about taking the GRE versus taking the LSAT and how that affects law school admissions. I'm kind of summarizing up the questions because there are a few of them about this topic.
Do you want to field that one?
I hate this question. Mostly because I have not seen it be successful for my students yet. That is not to say that it can't be. I think also sometimes the students that I've worked with are taking it because they're afraid of taking the LSAT and might already have some test anxiety. And so I think it's possible that the LSAT wouldn't have changed anything. But I think there's much less data to know what kind of schools are looking for with a GRE score. And because many of the people who will be applying have an LSAT score, if that's possible for you, I think it's generally can be a really, really helpful idea, especially because the GRE piece is just still so new. And I think law schools haven't totally figured out how they're thinking about it yet. But that's just my perspective. Do you have a different one?
No, exact same. I haven't had a student that went this route and had it work out well. I've had students that submitted both. But in every instance, the school they got into was like in their range of like logical outcomes given their overall application. So because I don't have firsthand knowledge and it's hard to find like an independent source on this, right? It's mainly just self accounts on Reddit and things like that. It's not something I can recommend, right? Period. I just don't know enough. I would say if you can take the LSAT, it's probably a wise choice to take the LSAT. Yeah.
Amazing. We have quite a few more questions, but I think we can save those to get towards the end of the webinar. But while I have everyone's attention, I just want to let you know that as a thank you for joining us here live tonight, we'd love to offer you a 10% off any one of our entire programs with the code 10OFFWeb. This is just a little thank you in case you do decide you need some sort of LSAT prep, some sort of counseling, admissions counseling, I should say. We're here to support you, and if we can help you financially, even with a 10% off, we'd love to do that. So we encourage you to take that. Additionally, in case we're not able to get to all the questions tonight, because I have a feeling we will not be, we have a ton of them in the chat. We also recommend you book that one-on-one. One of my awesome colleagues will be able to sit down with you and really go through your questions and kind of come up with a strategy and a game plan for your admissions process, no matter where you are in the cycle. I will give it back to Mika tomorrow.
Okay. So the second most important, well, I guess third most behind your GPA, but again, something that is under your control, right, is your personal statement, Personal statement is every school requires one. Can't think of really any exceptions unless they break it down into other smaller essays. Most schools ask you to do 2 pages with readable spacing and a readable font. So this is a very small document, but it is the document that you are pitching yourself to the people reading over your entire application package. This is the moment where you get to sort of talk to them, like on a person-to-person level to some degree. It's a moment where you get to tell them what sort of person you are and why you're here trying to get into their law school. And so you really kind of want to write a story about a path. That's how I would say it. Some people write these like one big event personal statements, which often come off to me as being sort of a bit naive to only have one event in your life that determines your entire career path, right? Telling a story over time about events that happened or decisions that you made, bad things that happened and how you reacted, right? Talking about your values as a person, right? And why those values are compelling you on this path towards law school. That's what we want in a personal statement. So you can think of it as almost like a little bit of like a mini autobiography that's written with a very direct purpose. Get this person to want to let you into your law school. The good thing is, right, non-traditional applicants usually have a lot better things to write about. You know, like coming straight out of college doesn't tell us a lot about what you've tried to do in life yet. But people who are non-traditional, right, they've had careers, they've had families, they've had all of these sort of trials and tribulations that are unique to sort of post-college life. And that gives you a lot of material to work with when thinking about building this narrative. So really connect with that, right? That's a unique advantage that non-traditional applicants have. They have more stories, right? They've had more time to have stories and more variety in life experiences. So really, really think about how that story pushes you to law school and put it on paper. Yeah, right, turn it back over.
Okay, so key elements of a strong narrative, right? You want to show transferable skills from your previous experiences and skills, hopefully, that are good things, traits, qualities for attorneys to have. I often say you do not want to write sentences that say, I am trustworthy, I am a good leader, right? Those sentences are not very believable because anyone can write those sentences. You want the reader to leave after reading your story, your narrative, your mini autobiography, and say, this person is a leader. They didn't have to tell me that. I saw that in the way that they behaved, or the way that they thought about this, or the way that they wrote about this, right? Or this person is trustworthy because I saw it based on the story they told me. That is really what you want the reader to take away. But to do that, I often tell clients that they need to backwards plan, right? Like, what are the traits that you're trying to show from this story? What should the reader leave being like, this person is blank? And if that's not coming through when someone reads your essay, then you need to make some tweaks to make sure that it's clearer. You want to align your narrative with the values and mission of your target law schools. I generally don't see students do this all the time, but I do. Certain schools have certain characteristics, right? So Northwestern notoriously likes students who have had more of a professional background before they go to law school. Sometimes that for non-traditional candidates can be really great to highlight your professional experiences, and that can align really nicely with schools that care about that. I think a lot of schools care about that, but some are more notorious than others. Use examples and achievements to support your claims and add credibility, and then make sure that you're focusing on something authentic, right? Don't get caught up in trying to tell. So I sometimes have candidates who want to tell like their parents' stories or their grandparents' stories, or a story about, how they helped their best friend, but really the essay is reading mostly as their best friend's story. And that is not, it's easier to write about someone else. I know that none of us like writing about ourselves in this way, but it has to be a story about you. That is what it has to be. And so you just have to work through the discomfort of that, and make sure that you are really front and center of the story and showcasing what traits and characteristics you will be bringing to the law school.
All right, so let's talk about like the mechanics of writing this. I like hooks. Usually I call it a drop-in, right? You start with a particular experience or anecdote from your own life that kind of helps frame the themes and values that the remainder of the personal statement is going to focus on. Think about that most of all, which is that you need to provide a framework for introducing other things about yourself. And you need to give the reader of the personal statement a sort of clear through line about who you are. I have had students that, like, I actually have a student right now who was really, really worried about doing the application stuff because he never had like a fancy internship. He had always worked part-time throughout college, and had in fact taken time off when his parents needed to help one of his siblings to help watch his other siblings and work and make money. And I said to him, like, from my perspective, that's an incredibly compelling story about someone who, and also graduated like in the top 5% of his class, right? Who, despite working part-time, meaningful hours every week, taking time off from school entirely, also going through the pandemic, obviously, and what that did to his university education. That's a really great, compelling narrative about someone who cares for their family and works really hard and wants to be excellent. And that's the sort of person I'd want at my law school if I were an admissions officer, right? So think about the story you're telling. He was worried that his credentials were bad, and maybe his credentials are bad, but his story is incredibly compelling, right? And that's what a personal statement gives you a chance to do, right? It levels the playing field for things like that. I think the thing I said to him was like, most fancy internships are just clerical work with no real responsibility, right? Like, it may sound fancy, but it's just like doing nothing at a fancy place, or doing something that is ultimately just clerical at a fancy place. Find your own story, talk about what compels you, and really, really think about your story there. Think about your moments in your life, in your narrative. And then finally, you end with a quick ode to the future, right? This sort of like I tend to focus a lot more on the hook and the journey than the future, because they get it. The whole point is that as you tell this story, it should be very obvious why you're choosing to go to law school, right? You shouldn't really need to spend much time on it at the end, but doing like a final paragraph to sum up, make a statement about how law school will help you be the person you're supposed to be, or be the person you want to be, right? Or achieve the goals you want to achieve. And, maybe a blurb about their law school of 1 or 2 sentences. But that's the narrative, right? When I said this was like an autobiography, it's like half autobiography, half pitch, So just keep that aspect in mind. All right. Turn it back over.
Okay, so we're back to letters of recommendation, and I know we're running out of time and have lots of questions, so I'm going to see how quickly I can get through this. You want to I did see a question in the chat about who to ask. So you want to choose recommenders who know you well and can speak to the work that you've done. Sometimes I have clients who are like, my dad's friend is a judge and can write a letter of recommendation for me. And I'm like, okay, what is he going to say? And the answer is like, I don't know. I'd maybe need to kind of write a bunch of it myself. And he doesn't, I've never interned for him. I haven't worked that closely with him. And my answer is, then it doesn't matter. You should not use that person to be your letter of recommendation. Law schools don't really care who has written your letter of recommendation. They care most that it is someone who has worked closely with you and that they can be trusted to tell the law school about whatever qualities they're talking about, right? So that might mean your supervisor from, a summer camp you worked at last year, right? That might mean a professor that you had multiple classes with, right? Or an advisor you worked with, or a mentor you've had since you were a kid that, from a nonprofit that you've been really involved with, right? Any of those things will demonstrate that they know you well, and so they know what they're talking about with you. You want to reach out at least 2 to 3 months before the application deadline to give them time. Some recommenders will ask to see your resume. They might ask to see the list of schools that you're going to apply to. They might ask to see some of your other materials, personal statements, YX essays, any of those things. Generally, the main ask I see is that they ask for a resume and a list of the schools, but they can't ask for more. So I would make sure that you build that into the ask. Like if they are asking you for more materials or, they might ask you for a phone call. I don't usually write letters for students without having a Zoom meeting with them to talk about it. So if that was not, on your radar, make sure that you're thinking about how that will add time to your schedule and your request.
Okay. So getting exceptional recommendation letters. Look, an admissions officer is going to be able to tell the difference between somebody who had you in a class and barely knew you, but you got an A and you asked and they liked you so that they said yes, versus someone who knows you, right? Someone who has worked with you for an extended period of time, someone who had you in 3 different classes over your college career and you were their TA, all of that sort of stuff, right? Authenticity matters for recommendation letters. A school's not going to begrudge you if you don't have like super intense academic recommenders, but if you can get really good recommendation letters, that can really matter, right? From your perspective, though, when we're talking about non-traditional applicants, we're usually talking about people that have been out of school for a while. The unfortunate fact is that most law schools will require at least 1 academic recommender, right? So work as best you can on that. Unfortunately, some schools will require more, which is why it's important to really look into what each school you're applying to actually requires, because schools are all over the place with letters of recommendation, just all over the place. But ultimately, it is much better to have 2 good professional recommenders, people that knew you, worked with you, saw you improve, grow, work hard, etc., over 2 milquetoast academic ones. So really look for the people that can testify to who you are, right? More than anything else, authenticity will sell here. I'll go ahead and do the preemptive. Well, my uncle is friends with a judge. What if the judge wrote me a letter? And I would say, have you hung out with the judge a lot? Does he know who you are and know what your personality is and has seen you work hard and grow as a person? No. Well, then he's just another sort of faceless recommendation letter where it doesn't really tell them anything about you. Another aspect here is that you will not be allowed to review the letter of recommendation. It is baked in. LSAC will ask you to waive your right, and you will say yes, because that's what's expected by law schools, right? They want these to be real letters, not letters that you helped somebody write. So give your recommenders your resume. If you have a little bit of an application narrative, right, when you've thought about the themes and sort of values that you want to display in your personal statement and other essays, give them a heads up on that, right? Give them all the information you can ahead of time, understanding that once they submit, it's done, right? You'll never see the final product. So kind of approach them with that in mind as well, right? Just sort of explain, like, I'm waiving my right to do that, to see this afterwards. I just kind of wanted to tell you about why I'm applying to law school, and I've attached my resume for you to review, and if you have any questions, ask me. Something along those lines, right? And yeah, we've already said multiple times, don't actually share the real deadline with them. Make up a fake deadline like a month early, right? But make sure they understand that this is, in fact, under a deadline, and stay on top of it, right? If you ask somebody to do this and you haven't heard back from them for 2.5 weeks, it's also kind of incumbent on you to go, maybe they haven't submitted it. Even more so because LSAC's Credential Assembly Service will tell you when they've submitted it, right? So you will be able to know, it's not even ambiguous. You'll know whether they've submitted it or not. And after a certain point, that's really on you to follow up. So just really stay on top of it. Sorry, I am having PTSD with former clients who just really don't want to stay on top of the ball on certain things. Yeah, frustration. All right, I'll turn it back over.
Oh, I think we're still really out of order.
Oh no.
Okay, I think we did this.
I think I did that. There we go.
We generally did I guess this is overall true, but I think you want to think about your application as every element should be speaking to all the other elements, right? I think that means that the things in your personal statement complement whatever's in your resume, complement whatever's in your supplemental essays, complement whatever your recommenders are saying, right? You're kind of building this entire package of who you are on the paper. And some schools don't interview, and so that might be all they get to see of you, right? You want to make sure that your authentic story, whatever that is coming through and seems genuine. And you want to demonstrate that you've taken initiative, right? That might look like different things to different people. That can be initiative at work. That can be initiative in your volunteer stuff. That might be initiative at home, right? If you have caregiving responsibilities, or you might have stories that are really impactful about things that you have done for friends, or whatever that is. Making sure that those kind of two pieces come through.
Okay, so just finally summing up here. I like the duplication at the end there. Isn't it funny? Look, if you have weak spots, do your best to address them. For example, most schools allow you to submit certain addendums if you want to explain certain parts of your application package and kind of your history. So if you have had significant time off, try to take a good half page to a page to quickly explain things like that. Don't make it the centerpiece of your application. We don't want to highlight downsides. But there are certain things that should be addressed if they've happened. Yeah, diversity statements are still a big part of the application process as far as I know. So I would say here that writing about your own experiences and also writing about your experiences interacting with diverse cultures are both valuable, and a good part of like the application package to like deeply consider. Again, we talk about like building a narrative, right? Tamara just talked about like think of it as a big whole. This is another essay that gives you a chance to further develop your own story, right? That's the way to think about it. And the last one is be concise. The LSAT is time pressured. Personal statements in every part of the application are space pressured. You want to try and make the best pitch possible, which means not belaboring points, which means not lingering on things, which means focusing on your story as opposed to the story, right? All of these like things matter a lot in terms of using that limited space as effectively as possible. Yeah.
So before we move on to the Q&A, I know we're over time. Hopefully we can take a minute or two tomorrow, Mika, just to go over maybe a question or two, because there's some really awesome discussions happening in the chat. But before we do that, we'd love some feedback from you, as you can see on screen. We very much value every single piece of feedback that we receive. So if you could take a moment to provide that, I promise you 5 or 6 questions tops. And what that allows us to do is very much to take the information back, improve our process, offer better guidance in the future. And you know what? Often enough, these surveys help us determine what sort of webinars we're hosting as well, right? So I know, for example, this webinar came from another webinar we had where somebody said, I want more information about non-traditional timelines. And we got that over and over and over again. So we definitely take this to heart, and we would appreciate any sort of feedback. Let's jump into the Q&A. Okay, so I'm thinking we can break it down into, I know we already talked about, there was a question regarding the GRE, so I think we won't go over that too much. I'm thinking we pick a question for letters of rec and a question regarding personal narratives. Okay, so there's a question in here about letters of recommendation for people who haven't been students for a long time and they don't necessarily have any sort of contact with past professors. Who do they reach out to?
Taylor, take that one.
I'm so sorry. I froze.
Oh, so no, you're back.
I missed the question.
Oh,
can you repeat it again? Sorry.
Yeah. What guidance do you have for individuals who maybe haven't been in school for a while and they need a letter of recommendation, but they, it's a little awkward reaching out to a professor you haven't had in X amount of years?
Go early, talk to professors early. I've had students contact me many years after I had them, and I am happy to write a letter, but you have to do a little bit more legwork. I expect you to offer a phone call, send me an update on what you've been doing since then, maybe jog my memory on how you did in my class and what things you were really proud of that you did in my class, right? I don't think it's as awkward as you all think it is. And honestly, like if professors don't want to do it, they just won't respond to you because you're not in their lives. So it's not, it's not awkward for them to just not respond. So you want to start early because that might happen, right? Like they might not respond and then you'll have to go to the next person on the list. But I think you do want to try and find one if you can. And I think, again, someone that you've taken multiple classes with, someone that you were close with while you were there, someone you did research with as an undergrad, if that's something you did, someone from a master's program, if you went to a different program, like all of those things are options. I do really recommend trying to think about finding a way to do that. And only in kind of rare circumstances do I say like, okay, you really can't make it, like the letter is not worth it. You will just have to have all non-academic letters. But I wouldn't shy away from it just because it's awkward to ask or because you haven't kept in great touch in the past few years. I think those are okay.
Yeah, I think most professors are willing to accommodate situations like this too, right? Like once they've been working as a professor for a while, it's happened to them, where someone needs an academic letter and they remembered this professor. And as a tutor, I can say it's a lot harder for me to remember students than it is for me to remember them or for them to remember me. But I also wouldn't begrudge them asking and being like, yeah, if I can help, sure. Just kind of tell me, what are you trying to say? And that's about it. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both. So there's a question in here that I can address. As part of your program, do you review personal statements and addendums for your clients? Yes, we do. We do a lot of that. We actually have unlimited edits for our personal statements and any sort of essays. Okay, so one more question in here, and then we can let everyone go for tonight. And I apologize, we won't be able to get to the questions tonight, but again, that's what these consultations are for. We want to hear from you. There was a question in here. It was pretty niche, but I think it was interesting to see the discussion happening around it. Will this be a bad time? And I'm assuming this is in regards to the personal statement to write, is this a bad time to write identity-based personal statements? So race, trans identity, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'd love to throw on that there's also an individual in here who was talking about writing a personal statement. And hold on, I'm going to find it. Yes, mentioning a personal statement that involves a trial, because that actually left a personally impactful experience with them. So what do you think about writing those sorts of topics for personal statements? Or is that something that should be reserved for, I'm sorry, the name, it slipped out of my head, diversity statements?
Okay, so a personal statement is about your journey to law school. Anything that plays a major role in that journey to law school and can be written in a very persuasive way that helps build your story and your themes and values should be included. Just, that's it, right? I don't think personal statements should be about identity. They should be about you as an overall person, not one aspect of who you are. Diversity statements, similarly, should not just be about your identity, it's about the experiences that has created in your life, right? And how that has changed you, caused you to grow, how that's made you fear certain things, and how you want to overcome those fears, all sorts of stuff, right? I think that all of that is valuable. I think a minimum amount of research can tell you which schools would react positively, which is the vast majority, and which schools don't want diversity mentioned at all, which is a very few in number, but they make themselves very obvious in the application process and through some Googling. So what I would say is for the 90% of law schools, you should continue to write about the stuff you would have written about last year.
I don't have much to add besides I have seen candidates successfully talk about their identity in a personal statement, but only in the context that we just shared in terms of how the experiences of that identity have led them to law school, right? So it is not the same thing as an identity essay. I would not, and also like if the stories are overlapping, that is a good time to cut and run and do two different things. Do not, like you don't have that much space in your application. You do not want to waste space being repetitive. That's not to say that it has to be repetitive or that it necessarily is, but if you are finding that it is feeling repetitive to you or you're reaching kind of for the same stories, then that is a key to maybe separate those things and find a different kind of story to tell for one of them.
Amazing. I think this is a really great time to wrap up tonight's discussion. I hope you saw the little heart that just appeared on screen. Tamar, Mika, thank you once again for being with us tonight, for sharing all your wonderful insights. You're very much appreciated. And to our audience, thanks so much for joining us. We love doing these. We are super happy that you found this helpful. Somebody says, how do we book the consultations? Scan that QR code. It'll lead you back to a landing page. But yes, thank you everyone for joining. We host these webinars weekly and we look forward to seeing you next week where we're speaking all about logical reasoning, and it's actually hosted by Mika. So we'll see her again next week.
All right.
Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.
Take care.